In this video, we'll be looking at Platt's new role-based access control features. Role-based access control, or RBAC for short, describes features of a system that allow its administrators to restrict the access that other users should have to particular areas of that system. In the case of a system such as Platt, the goals of RBAC are twofold. Firstly, to limit access to sensitive data, such as financial records, and secondly, to remove access to areas of the system that particular users, or perhaps even all users, do not require, thus simplifying workflows and reducing the chance of user error. You may be aware that previous versions of Platt have included a very primitive form of RBAC. In this browser tab, I am logged into an older version of Platt. And here at the top of the Security tab for my own user record, we find a Roles field, providing three options: Admin, Basic, and Restricted. These roles provide very basic, hard-coded RBAC. Admin users can access everything. Basic users are not provided with this setup menu, and therefore cannot easily access configuration of organizations, event types, users, and the like. And restricted users have only access to perform a single narrow task, such as to provide a reference for a new applicant. Our goal has been to broadly emulate the existing functionality with the default setup that will be applied when Platt's new RBAC module is deployed, but to allow this to be customized by each organization so you can choose who has access to precisely what. Let's start by taking a look at how this Security tab looks in the latest version of Platt. Here you will notice that the Roles field has been replaced by user groups. Initially, your organization will have access to two user groups, Basic and Admin. All of the users who you had set up at the time of the RBAC module being deployed will be put into the user group that corresponds to their historical role. As these two user groups emulate the access control provided by the same named role in earlier versions of Platt, your users should initially notice no difference. It is important to note that the Basic and Admin user groups that we see here are set up against the top-level organization and are available to your organization through the usual inheritance mechanism. You cannot modify these user groups, so if you want to customize user access for your own organization, you will need to define your own groups, either using one of these two groups as a template or beginning the setup from scratch. To manage user groups for your organization, select Setup, User Groups. Let's take a look at the top-level admin group first of all. Here on the User Groups page, we see that user groups are really very simple. Along with a description and the organization to which it belongs, the only other property of a user group is this Securables list. This list defines the areas of Platt that members of this user group will have access to. So what exactly is a securable? Well, very simply, a securable defines an area of Platt that access can be limited to. This could be a page, a tab, an individual field, a group of records of a particular type, or an individual record. It could even be a function of the system, such as invoice generation or event cancellation. Securables are themselves records in the Platt database. These two items that we see selected for the top-level admin user group, all API requests and all APIX requests, are two of about 20 securables that will be provided as defaults by the vanilla RBAC module. As with the Basic and Admin user groups that we have already discussed, these default securables are set up against the top-level organization, which means your organization will inherit access to these records on a read-only basis. Of course, you will be able to define additional securables for your own organization as the need arises. Alongside the descriptions seen in this column of the securables list, we see some labels. Here, API, and here, APIX. These labels identify the type of the securable that has been selected. Securables fall into one of four types. First, we have API securables. API securables control standard access to records. What types of record or what individual records particular user groups can view, update, or delete. Most access and updates to Platt records that are not made through a calendar, including access to service users, care workers, users, and organizations, go through what we call API requests and can therefore be regulated by API securables. The second type of securable is APIX. APIX securables control non-standard access to records and data processing tasks such as invoice generation. Just about everything that your users might do from a calendar involves API requests. So, to restrict updates to events, medications, tasks, and third-party responsibility for task and med sessions, you will need to use APIX restrictions. So far, we've discussed two types of securable, API and APIX. These two securable types are used to restrict what requests will be authorized by the server, what data the server will allow a user to request, and what updates it will later be authorized to perform to those records. Because the rules are being applied at the server, API and APIX securables offer the greatest level of protection against malicious activity. Even if you had bad actors who were able to bypass front-end security, API and APIX securables will protect data from unwanted access or modification. The two remaining types of securable are enforced by the browser at the front end. These are URL securables for controlling what pages users are able to access, and DOM securables for controlling access to individual elements of those pages, whether that be tabs, menus, buttons, field groups, or individual fields. If I attempt to open a page that has been restricted for my user group through use of a URL securable, I receive a permission denied message and remain on the page that I was on when the relevant link was clicked. As I am being prevented from accessing the runs page, the new run menu item is redundant. It's probably worth hiding this menu item to simplify the user interface and prevent me from selecting the wrong item by mistake. This could be done using a DOM securable. As you've probably begun to realize, RBAC objectives can usually be achieved in a number of different ways, and to maximize security whilst providing the best possible user experience probably should involve using a combination of different securable types. For example, a common requirement of any secure system is to prevent most users from being able to access or modify their own record, or that of other users. After all, if a user is able to modify their own access, they will be able to bypass any restrictions that you might set up for them. To prevent access to user records could be done in a number of different ways. Firstly, and perhaps most obvious of all, use a DOM securable to hide the user's item in this menu. But what if your users know the URL for accessing the relevant page without needing to do so using that menu? Well, to block their access to the user page regardless of how it is accessed, you can use a URL securable. But what if your user is a bad actor who knows how to interact with the Plat server without access to the relevant page? In this case, their attempts to request, update, or delete access to user records could be prevented at the server using one or more API securables. In the next video, we're going to take a look in detail at API and APIX securables.